Hey guys, people. I didn't follow the rules. I didn't keep my picture on my front slide, but it's all right. I don't look like me anymore. I'm a totally different person. So this has been a great event. This is the last talk. Wade will probably say something afterwards. I've been really happy to be a part of it. It is weird still to be talking with my mouth face and it go into people's ears without a machine in the way. I don't have a solution for that. I just wanted to acknowledge that it feels weird. And if it feels weird or off to you, I think that's okay. So, I wanted to start by saying that I like you. I really appreciate that you're here. I wish we could have spent more time getting to know each other. I, being last, was feeling pretty anxious about everything the whole time. So I wasn't exactly checked in and available. But I wish we would have had more time to talk. So if you have any questions about anything, feel free to ping me. We can do it in the Slack channel if the internet works, which it probably doesn't. Or you can just find me on Twitter afterwards. And if it's about something totally unrelated, I'd still love to chat with you about it. And if I'm not the right person, I'd love to help you find the right person. So you're awesome. You're doing your best. I believe that you're doing your best. And if you're not, maybe it's because you need a break. And that's okay too. So I'm Garth. If you're looking for me on Twitter, this is my handle, GarthDB. I'll be more likely to answer on Twitter than I would be on email, so that's probably the best way to get a hold of me. I have been working at Adobe for 10 years. I am a lead design system engineer. I started working there 10 years ago as an experienced designer, and it's kind of Andy Branch's fault. Andy was we worked at an agency together, and he encouraged me to take a user experience design role and start a department at this agency. So it's a little bit his fault that I got into that. But I've been doing design and engineering and going back and forth my whole career. And I found that in design systems that a lot of hybrids feel comfortable there. So a lot of designers and engineers who enjoy working both disciplines or multiple disciplines enjoy working in design systems. So I'm pretty comfortable. Our design system is called Spectrum. We have a website for it, spectrum.adobe.com. We have a great team. We have an amazing website. If you go and take a look at it, we have a content strategist and designers who are very thoughtful and intentional about what they're doing, and they like to document that intent. So if you do get a chance to take a look at it, I highly recommend the principles page. It's probably one of my favorite places. And then in the foundations pages, they've got explanations and discussions and descriptions of all of the systems that we've put in place. Feel free to grab some of that as you're thinking about what to do in your own organizations and teams if you want to. But really, it's nice to know that people are thinking through things. So back to the topic. I gave this, well, no, not this talk, but I gave a talk similar about design systems a few years ago at a conference called FusionConf. And afterwards, there was a little Q&A, and a student was on the front row, raised his hand and said, and this was after I gave like a 40-minute presentation on design systems, he said, sorry, what's a design system? So I totally missed the mark on that one. So we're gonna tackle that. And I think it's a good way of jumping into it is this definition of a design system. And there's lots of ways to define it. In fact, I'm gonna give you a definition today that I'm sure many people would disagree with, and that's okay. They're wrong, but it's still okay. So I want to start by talking about a way that a design system oftentimes is built. So we're going to start fairly simple. We're going to ease into complexity. So let's take the use case of a single product, or maybe you're a designer or an engineer. There's not a lot of engineers here, are there? This is, I think I'm the only engineer speaker. Oh, there's another engineer. Good. Feel free to raise your hand or not. That's okay too. Anyway, if you're a single engineer or a designer working on a single product or a brand new product or starting from scratch, this could be at a large organization or more likely at a small organization or team where you're given very little and you just have to create something. In those cases, you don't have a lot of time and energy to think about larger scopes. You're really just focused on your deadlines, making sure that you're providing value and creating things and moving quick and breaking and all that stuff. So you're just building stuff. But it's pretty quick that you start to realize that you're maybe not doing it in the most efficient way possible. So you start collecting your inefficiencies. And this term is intentionally vague. This could be, if you're a designer, noticing that you're using the same colors over and over again, but that maybe you haven't collected them in a single place. Maybe you're going to a previous design file and copying and pasting stuff and pasting it into your new one, and then tweaking it to get it to fit. And then you start to see, wait, there's some inconsistencies because there's human error. Or maybe you're working with other products who are doing things at the same time and you're not collaborating to the degree that you can actually catch up with each other, and so you're solving the same problem in different ways. You're starting to see these inefficiencies and these inconsistencies. If you're an engineer, you're starting to see that you're repeating yourself. There's code that's very similar in multiple places, making it harder to maintain. You're increasing your technical debt. You're going against the dry principle, or do not repeat yourself. And you feel it. This becomes a pain or a friction as you're working. And so it's fairly natural to want to try and consolidate these problems and solutions into a single place. Depending on your design tool, maybe you're collecting a library of swatches, maybe you're able to collect styles, maybe you're able to actually collect whole components, and then you're doing a little bit less of copying and pasting between things. If you're an engineer, maybe you're able to abstract things out into functions or classes, depending on what you're working on. Maybe you're able to bring in libraries or create your own libraries, where you're not repeating yourself so much. And this is just a natural way to go about things. Next, you'll notice that you're collecting new inefficiencies. So it becomes a process that you're repeating back and forth. I would say, though, that adding one more step as you're going through this and this is maturing, you have to also figure out how to reconcile your existing collected solutions with the new things that are coming in. How do I reconcile what I have with what I need? And do I blow this up and start over? Do I destroy this? Do I make something new? Do I broaden the use case for this solution so that it also encompasses this other thing? Or is this a completely new thing? And you're going to get it wrong. So you're going to make one assumption about what will be best for you in the future, and then you're going to be like, oh, that wasn't right, and then you're going to have to go back and fix it. So it's this iterative process. So you just go through, and you just keep repeating this. And I put it into this visualization because I like that. It makes it easier for me to see. Now, if you're a product or a people manager, perhaps, I hope you realize that this is happening, but it's possible you don't realize that this is happening. Because if you're looking at your roadmap or your sprint plan, you may not see all of those things happening in those areas, especially if a team is working by themselves, if it's a single engineer or a single designer or a single researcher. If they're doing things and they're starting to systematize or collect solutions, they may not be doing it in a way that's bubbling up or public or readily available to everybody else. Because collaborating can slow things down sometimes, and being vocal about it can slow things down. And you're still trying to hit those deadlines. But if it's not happening, it's a little bit like working in a room that's continually getting messier, and you feeling like you're living in a disorganized state, but that no one else recognizes it. And so it can cause this, in me, a little bit of slight panic. And I'm still able to hit my deadlines. I'm still able to create the things, but the product manager or my own manager may not recognize that I am not happy with the way things are, and something's going to give, and it's not going to go great. So hopefully, your product manager can see the value in buying down technical debt, figuring out ways to be more consistent across your products, even if it's not a product that's completely owned by the product manager that you're working with. This is a hard thing. So, back to the original question, what is a design system? Is this a design system? And this is my definition today. It might change. But I would put it in these terms. A design system is the practice of collecting inefficiencies, consolidating solutions, and reconciling the solutions with existing ones, all while in the pursuit of creating solutions. And this is the definition of system building in general. This is not specific to design or design systems. But when we apply it to design systems, now we're talking about specifically creating better user experience solutions, or customer experience solutions, if you like that term better, depending on what you're working on. But let's get into some concrete examples. If you're a designer, maybe you just got a Dropbox where you're just throwing everything into it, and you're sharing it with anybody else who needs it. Is that a design system? Are you making style guides? Are you making spec docs or UI kits or red lines? Do you have a defined layout grid? I would say all of those things are a design system. You are systematizing your decisions so that you don't have to make that same decision every single time. And from the engineering perspective, code libraries, component libraries, Sass variables, if you're using that, or CSS custom properties, if you're a little more ahead of things, or maybe you have a defined layout grid that someone can just throw into their project. If maybe you're using like Bootstrap or some other UI library that someone else created and you're trying to tweak it and force it into your solution. I would say all of those things are design systems. And I think that's where some people might push back from the design system community. There's this desire to want to say, hey, we got to make sure everyone's doing the best sort of design system process possible. And honestly, it's just not sustainable at every single organization. So what a design system is to one person or one team and where they are is going to be drastically different than everybody else. And they shouldn't be made to feel bad because that's where they are in their product development. So a little less gatekeeping on that, I would hope. And then there's one last ingredient that I think we really need to focus on to have a sustainable design system, and that is collaboration. And really, this is part of that reconciliation, or the reconciling of the new with the existing. Except it's not just reconciling between multiple files or multiple solutions that you've come up with. It's really reconciling between teams, products, disciplines. So designers and engineers and product managers and researchers figuring out how to work all together. And I'm literally meaning that, not you're doing design in your design system, in your design files, and I'm doing my coding over here, but finding a way to consolidate those solutions to a single place. So, concrete examples. This is a case study conference, so we should talk about case studies, right? This is our button. This is a Spectrum button. We usually start with this whenever we're talking about examples. This is a call to action button, to be specific. We are using Adobe Blue, and we have Adobe Clean as the font here. Well, buttons don't look just like that, so it's pretty quick that you start to get requests for different variants of the same button. That's primary, secondary. I think this is now called warning or negative, and then over background. And we just changed the API on that as well, so there's going to be a different change to that. And then we have quiet that was added. So variants of variants. Notice there's no quiet call to action because that's not a thing. And then it's quickly that we need to figure out how we're going to do states. And if we're dealing with states, then you have to deal with WCAG standards. You've got to figure out how to have enough high enough contrast ratio that people know the difference between a normal button and a button when it's been hovered on, that they can see that distinction between those. So you have to have contrast ratios and all those things figured out. Now we also have color stops or color themes at Adobe. We've got our light, lightest, dark, darkest. We've actually getting rid of extra light, and things are blowing up a little bit because we're working more in generative color things. But right now, this is a good example. Then we've got our different platforms. And some of these have subtle differences, but definitely scale between web mobile and desktop web are very different. And then some of the desktop apps have a very different scale as well. So you can see that these things kind of blow up quickly. This is not a metaphor. This is literal. This is just the button. And if we zoom in, this is the sort of stuff you're looking at. So this is our XD document. To maintain this by hand would be torture. So if we had a designer who was in charge of making sure that we had UI kits to send out to everybody, it would be probably an impossible task to maintain. So it's not something that we can do large scale or long term. And we have lots of different components. And I will say that Adobe's design language probably is the most complex as far as number of platforms. Second, maybe to Google. But it's not unusual. Nothing that we're talking about is that extreme for any company of any size to need as far as being web and desktop and different color themes. Dark mode, light mode. That's pretty normal for just about any product at this point. So our solution deals with tokens. So if we're dealing with design tokens are name value pairs that describe the design. So here we're talking about colors, or we're talking about typeface properties. If you look at the button, we're talking about specifically what's the background color, what's the height, what's the border radius, what's the font. And a lot of people would be like, well, that's just CSS. And that's true if you are web only and if you don't have design. But most people have some native implementations and most people have design. So CSS is not a scalable solution for every single thing that you're doing. So we have it abstracted out to its own name value pair system. Just a more complex example that's dealing with multiple components together. So we've got an H2 body, an HR between it, and then you've got body text, and then you've got the two different buttons, call to action, secondary. So when we're dealing with design tokens, if you have ooh, that font is loading all wrong. It's all right. You can describe a button, and that button gets propagated out to multiple disciplines and multiple teams. And then if you decide to make a change the background color, then you can propagate that change out to the teams as well. So our design tokens, they go out to these different teams, but they go out in different ways. We've got a tool that takes our design tokens and then converts it to CSS custom properties, and that helps most of our teams. We've got web components in React. They actually consume our CSS, which is abstracted away from them. They don't have to work with CSS half as much as the rest of us do, because I have to build the CSS for them, and they have a consistent CSS code base between the multiple implementations there. Native controls consume our design tokens directly. And then we have UI kits, which are SVGs that are generated from the design tokens for the designers. They create these XD files from that SVG. And then we also have an XD plugin, which is a huge value. This is an old example, old video of an old UI, but you can bring in a button, and then you can change the properties of that button. It's got the API for that button locked into the design application. And this is XD. And so the designer can then take it and break out that component if they want to tweak it and make something custom. But getting into the design system is not hard. Using the existing design system is not hard. They don't have to go hunting through UI kits to find specific things that they need. And then you can do things at larger scale or a little bit quicker. I'm going to skip through this one. Yeah, this one is, we just go through an example of doing desktop and mobile, but I'll skip to this one. This one's a little bit better. Being able to switch the theme on all of them at once. We're greatly reducing the amount of design work and churn that the designers are doing to get things to work on multiple platforms or color stops. And then we also added and it's a little bit hard to see at first here, but we added a framework implementation of our design system, so it turns all blue. I think it's called wireframe. So it's a really nice way to demonstrate or explicitly say, hey, this is a wireframing process, because it's really easy to make very polished looking UIs when you have this sort of tool, and people assume that it's finished or that this is the final. So by being able to create a wireframe version, that means you're signaling to them, hey, don't treat this too seriously. Okay. So I'm just going to go through some random stuff. Lessons learned, questions that I think people often ask us. and my own opinions. And then if any of this ends up in the Q&A, that's fine too, if you want to go into it further. So when's a design system done? I have definitely gotten that question. It's not. Your design system's done when your product is done. So has anyone finished their product and doesn't need to do any more work on it? Like, that's not a thing. Your design system is evolving as your product needs evolve. Do I need a dedicated design system team? I can't answer that for you. That's a really good question, and you do need to figure out when you might need to do that. It does need to happen if you want to expand your collaboration. If you want to reduce the amount of duplicated effort across teams, you need to have a centralized place where that is happening, and most likely a centralized governing system, which would be a team that handles that. All right, one of the biggest benefits that we don't talk about enough with design systems is improved accessibility. When you fix a component for accessibility, for meeting WCAG standards in one place, and all the teams then can use that component, your accessibility has improved across the entire company and product line. And you don't have accessibility problems slipping through the cracks as easily. This is huge as far as a return on investment for design system work. Content strategy. We have a content strategist on our team. We have engineers, we have designers, we have product manager, we have a program manager, and we also have a content strategist who's part of a larger content strategy team within the branding team at Adobe. Our content strategist is fantastic. It is not her job to write our docs for us or to check our grammar, though she'll do that sometimes. We try not to ask her to do that. The biggest help that she is planning out APIs for our designers and for our engineers. And she helps us with naming, which is the #1 problem that we deal with. Naming and versioning, I would say. Because we're such a tightly knit team between our designers and our engineers, our design team is actually using semver or semantic versioning. They individually version their designs for their components. So it's very clear when a component has a new version, if it's a breaking change, a minor update, or if it's a patch or a fix to something that was unintentional before. And designers can look at that version number, and if they have an understanding of semver, can understand, hey, this is going to take some work to implement this change or not. Design system is a tax. This is a great analogy. It is infrastructure at a company. I'd also say management is a tax. I would say leadership is a tax. Anything that doesn't directly generate revenue or create a product themselves could be seen as infrastructure or something that's a tax, that's a burden to the whole company, but hopefully brings value and allows those who are doing the things that bring in value or revenue to work better and faster. So again, this goes back to the question of, do I need a whole team? Will it make your teams go faster? Will they be able to prototype and design and engineer new solutions quicker if that was in place? Questions about, what do I do if there's something missing in the design system? You're not going to be able to create a design system that has every single solution for every single team. They're going to need custom solutions, and they're going to need their own designers, and they're going to need their own engineers to come up with those solutions. Sometimes those things then get consolidated and bubble up back into our design system. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes we have these things that we call, I'm trying to think of what the name is now. They're pretty much beta components, or components that have been provided by the community. And so they live in a centralized place that documentation can work on it across teams, that people can collaborate a little bit on it, and that you don't have people reinventing the wheel, even if it's not formally part of the design system. And then those things contributions, that's the word that we're using now. Those contributions live on their own contribution website. That's the only thing that's not public right now. I don't see why it shouldn't be public, honestly. If they asked me, I would have said, let's make it public. It's not showing anything secret or proprietary. We're just showing other UI components that we don't think necessarily should be part of the design system yet. And that's also where our designers put things while they're in the process of working on them, so that our engineers can see, or our products can see, hey, this is what's probably coming next. Do design systems stifle innovation? This is things I hear from designers, where they're a little bit worried that if you have a design system, what's left for the designer to do? And that's a dangerous mentality, I think. If you want, or if your definition of innovation is to be different than the rest of your company, that's not very innovative. That's destructive, distracting, and just go post something on Dribbble or Behance if you want to do that sort of work. Just go grab some famous website and redesign it and get the accolades of making something new, right? Like, don't mess around with people's user experience if that's what you want to do. But there's plenty of opportunity for innovation within a design system. You need to make custom components. Just because components exist doesn't mean that they know how to work well together. And again, they're never done. They still need to be worked on. And that comes from the product teams. Products need to bring these conversations up to the design system because the design system isn't meeting as regularly with customers as the products are. How do you govern? This one's really hard because what you're really trying to do is not step on products' toes. What you're really trying to do is provide value. And that is, there have been several design system-like efforts at Adobe that have not gone well. They have not succeeded in the sense that they don't exist anymore, if that's the definition of success. What we've done differently with Spectrum that has really gained momentum is that we stopped trying to tell people to use our design system. We started providing value and making our tools easier to use. That plugin for XD has been huge for getting designers to use our design system because they can work on things faster as a designer, and then they hand that design over to the product, and if the product isn't using our implementation of the design system, all of a sudden the engineers have all this pressure to make their stuff look like what the designers got from us. So by providing value, by making their job easier, it's a lot easier to get adoption. Also CSS. Turns out our engineers, especially the ones who like working on JavaScript applications, they are happy to never write CSS if they can avoid it. So by providing the CSS in a way that they can consume and then write their components around it, they're much more likely to have a consistent experience on their platform. And we do. We have multiple platforms. There was a time when Adobe said this is the framework that you have to use in JavaScript. It was React. And there was a request of maybe we only build things for React. And I, among other people on our team, pushed back on that because we knew that that's not how engineering works. If you're told that you can only use React at a company as large as Adobe, you're going to find a pocket of people who are going rogue and doing stuff and not wanting to tell anyone and not get attention. Then hopefully they're grandfathered in once they're making money. Nobody really likes being told what tools they have to use. So trying to develop things in such a way that are general enough that anybody could grab and use with whatever platform that they already feel comfortable with. And that goes back to the same question of how do you increase adoption. So that's pretty much. And then how do you scale your team? This one's new for us. The best solution that we've come up with so far and that we're still trying to work on is try to tie the financing of your design system to the size of your company. And I don't have a magic number there for you. That's something that still needs to get worked out a little bit. But something that if the company increases in size, that the design system, it's just assumed that the design system is going to need to increase as well. The team who's working on it. Okay, so that's it for all my potpourri stuff. That's it for my talk. We're going to have a few minutes for Q&A. Yeah, we're good? Clap. Yeah.
Thank you, Garth.
Can I take a picture, Ben?
Take a picture?
Yeah.
You're just breaking all the rules, aren't you?
Absolutely. I didn't say you need to be in it if you don't want to be.
Can I?
Absolutely.
I assumed that you wanted to take a picture with me.
I was with them more than you, but yes.
Dang it. Now I look like an idiot. All right, we got a couple questions from the Slade family, it seems, in Jessica Slade and Parker Slade.
Okay.
First, before I jump into their questions, I think it's good context here. How big is the design systems team at Adobe?
I should have gotten the actual numbers because we just hired a couple people. So if we're talking engineers, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I want to say 6 And then an engineering manager, and then designers, we have about the same. We have a little bit more designers than so our design system is within the design, our design system team is within the design org under branding and user experience at Adobe. The React teams and the Spectrum Web Component teams are in completely different organizations. So it's not all one effort. When we started, the engineering side, we were 2. That was me and Larry Davis. I was an engineer and a product manager and an engineering manager. We were doing everything. And then we had one designer who was part-time giving us stuff. So very organic growth, for sure.
Awesome. Okay, so first question, do you recommend any kind of user testing when creating or changing anything in the design system? If so, what kind of testing do you recommend?
So 2 sides of this. We have visual regression testing, so that we can check in the code when things change that it doesn't have a huge impact on everything else. We're also working on integrating those generated SVGs into our visual regression testing so that what the designers are using is known to match up with what the engineers are creating. As far as user testing, a lot of that actually goes to research. Adobe has its own research. And then we also have the products and the implementations themselves. We rely a lot on the communication and the research that's happening at the product level. And then some of it is needing to make judgment calls at times. And so you don't want your design system team to be made up of junior or inexperienced people, but people who have good experience with the research and data-backed decisions.
Okay. What main things do you consider when designing the same component across different platforms and devices?
There's questions about, you should be looking into the HIG, you should be looking into the interface guidelines for those individual platforms. There are things that you're not supposed to be doing that people just ignore and do anyway. But your team needs to make those judgment calls. You need to understand what Apple and what Google want you to do on their platforms, and then see how that fits within your design system. And that being said, it depends on your team size too, right? Like if you need to have square buttons on Windows, but that is a huge load to put onto your team and you just don't have the capacity to do that, probably you're going to punt on that for now. Just know that you should catalog it and figure out how you're going to come back to it eventually, if it's a platform you care about.
Makes sense. Which inefficiencies and inconsistencies are often missed?
There's a ton at Adobe that we found. There was this famous time when somebody went through and counted all the number of sliders that we have in Photoshop. Just distinct slider components that are doing the same thing. Sometimes slightly different things, like you've got color sliders or the opacity slider, but a lot of them were not that different. Those things creep in. The longer a product exists, the more people who work on them, the less familiar people are with what each other are doing, the more likely it is that people are going to solve things. Or sometimes it just happens because somebody says, I know that it was solved this way before, but I don't like it, so I'm going to change it in my own little grassroots way. So over here, when I'm doing the same thing, I'm going to start with my own. That's where you get these inconsistencies.
Rebels. Okay. What is your process for deciding if a design component should be added or changed? Is there a formal process for submitting the idea or getting a new component approved?
Yeah, there's a lot of talking. We have a twice-weekly design workshop where we all jump into a Zoom together and we go over the things that we're working on. And those are the designers who are leading that. The engineers who are in there are mostly in there for technical expertise and making sure that they know what can be done and what can't be done and what it would take to do those things. As far as like a formalized process, we have a checklist. If you go on the website, for every single component, we have a checklist of what needs to happen before a component is considered done. So our definition of done is very specific, and it has, our contributions website is pretty much those components that don't have all those things done. And they include accessibility reviews, internationalization reviews, trying to figure out if all of those things can happen and get all the stuff for all the different platforms and all that stuff covered. So are we already out? We're out of time.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll follow up with anybody if you have any other questions.
Thank you, Garth.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.